As we begin our study of Islam, it's important to get a few things right about terminology. I have a lot of students who submit papers and exam questions where they aren't even using the terms Islam and Muslim correctly. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as we get started here. Islam comes from an Arabic word that simply means submission. It has a similar root as other important Arabic words, such as salam, meaning peace, and others. So to practice Islam means more fully a kind of submission to the will of God. So while the general word simply means submission, when talking about the religious tradition that begins in the 7th century with the Prophet Muhammad, Islam is about submission to the will of God. One who practices Islam is referred to as a Muslim, which simply means one who submits. And obviously in this instance, one who submits to the will of God. It is referred to as a kind of engaged surrender, where you are surrendering yourself to God, not only in the faith that you have in God, but in an engaged way, meaning in a life of practice, where you practice submission through your actions, behaviors, thoughts, attitudes, etc. Now, when I capitalize these terms here, I'm using that to refer specifically to the religious tradition that we will study as scholars, that again begins in the 7th century with the Prophet Muhammad. But I've also typed out here the same terms with lowercase letters to begin them. And this is just to highlight that the notion of submitting to the will of God is not something that just begins in the 7th century. Neither is the notion of individuals or objects even that submit to the will of God. So when I use the term Islam with a little I, that is just the general notion of submission to the will of God that has existed, according to capital I Islam, for the entire history of the universe. When I use the word Muslim with a little m, this is where I'm referring to anything within the universe, which according to capital I Islam is by nature Muslim. So for example, plants and all animals, including humans, according to capital I Islam, the religion of Islam, are by nature Muslim. When a tree, for example, grows its roots down into the ground and its trunk and branches up into the sky, that is that tree submitting to the will of God, right? What some might call the laws of physics or the laws of nature. Of course, for theists, generally, the idea is that God, the creator, is the source of all of those laws. So when a tree performs in certain ways, that is the tree submitting to the will of God. And the same is true for inanimate objects, for the angels, and for all animals, including me, including my dog, and all other animals. We are all by nature Muslim. That means that when human animals, for example, are born, that means that we are, at our birth, by nature Muslim. We're not capital M Muslim, especially those of us who were not born into families that are capital M Muslims. But we are still little m Muslims, meaning that all of the babies born throughout the world have a natural inclination to submit to the will of God, just like all plants and all other animals. Right? The unique thing about human Islam, using a little I, is that human Islam is unique in being an Islam of choice. And what that means is that even though we are all born little m Muslims, humans have the freedom, the free will to actually stray from that path of submission to the will of God. There's a very different view of human nature as it is now experienced than what we saw with Christianity. With Christianity, when studying the Pelagian controversy, the theology of Augustine, we saw the notion of original sin, which says that after the sin of Adam and Eve, all humans are already born into a sinful state known as original sin, a kind of original disposition towards sinfulness. Within Islam, this is more similar to Judaism, there is no such original stain on the souls of human beings that are born into this world. No, we are originally born with that natural desire to submit to the will of God. Trees and other animals, they don't have the choice to ever stray from that path. They are by nature Muslims and they remain Muslims, obviously with a little m. My dog is not a member of capital I Islam, the religion that begins in the 7th century with the Prophet Muhammad. But he is, according to Islam, a Muslim because he naturally submits to the will of God in his life. Right? The problem is that because humans have that freedom to stray from this path, most of us do. Most of us start to submit to our own will rather than the will of God. Fortunately, God has a remedy for the straying humans among us. God has decided throughout the history of humanity, the history of the universe, to send into the world prophets and messengers to call us back to our natural state of submission to the will of God. And we will see in later videos that there have been all kinds of prophets and messengers sent into the world to teach the basic message of Islam, the basic message of submission to the will of God. Something, however, is unique with the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. And the uniqueness is not necessarily found in him, but it's found in the revelation that he is given, the Quran. And because he is given such a perfect revelation, we will no longer ever need another prophet or messenger. Muhammad will be the final prophet because we now have a message that is a perfect message of Islam, which is why we can really start to refer to the religion that flows out of the Prophet Muhammad as capital I Islam, because it is finally the perfect message to call humanity back to its natural desire to submit to the will of God. So again, we won't continue to make use much of the kind of capital and lowercase notions of Islam and Muslim, but it is important to think about the basic Muslim nature of all that exists, including human beings as they are born into the world. But I also really want to make sure that we're all on the same page using these terms. Islam is a noun. It's used to describe the religious tradition that begins with the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century, especially when it is capitalized. And a capital M Muslim is one who practices capital I Islam, one who is a member of that tradition. Right? We could also use the term Islamic, which will be an adjective. So we can refer to Islamic philosophy or Islamic literature. Sometimes the word Muslim is also used as an adjective. So you could say Muslim beliefs. In scholarship, you see both Muslim and Islamic used in some ways interchangeably as the adjective. But again, primarily, Muslim will be used to refer to the people who practice the religion of Islam that begins in the 7th century with the Prophet Muhammad.